see them revealing, the sources of these programs, nor their applications right now.
Okay, I worked in the U.S. space program for 36 years. I was a contractor employee, first working for McDonnell Douglas and then ending up working for Boeing after McDonnell Douglas was purchased by Boeing. I started at the end of the Mercury program and then worked the whole Gemini program. And during Gemini, I was responsible for the design of the equipment for the life support system. And so I had a distinct interest in keeping astronauts alive and having successful equipment. During the program, when we were flying the Gemini spacecraft, my interest in UFOs became very real. It became real because, first of all, Gemini 2, which was unmanned, it was rumored and talked about among our researchers that 2 UFOs had followed Gemini 2. And then Gemini 2 was, of course, recovered later. And I didn't think too much about that except, yeah, that's kind of funny. Very interesting stuff. And then when Gemini 4 flew, and its 4-day mission, 66 orbits, with James McDivitt and Ed White, about halfway through the mission, McDivitt said he has something up here with him.
Astronaut Gordon Cooper is an American hero with a log of over 222 hours of manned spaceflight. He had a long and illustrious career of service to his country. With over 11,000 hours of flight, he was a fighter pilot, U-2 test pilot in the Air Force, and is one of the first men to ever fly in space. He orbited the Earth 22 times in Phase 7, the last of the Mercury missions, on May 15th and 16th of 1963. On August 21st of 1965, he orbited the Earth again on Gemini 5 and remained a backup for Apollo 10.
Well, I've had some occasions to know some of the people who were involved in Roswell at one stage or the other. I think there's been an awful lot of untruths put out on Roswell and an awful lot of conjecture. I think there have been some truths in it. I think definitely there was something other than a weather balloon there. Very likely. I'd like to think they reversed engineered it and did something with it. Did some benefit with it, which would be the logical thing to do, but I have no way of knowing whether they did or not.
Within hours of the crash at Roswell, U.S. General Nathan Twining designated the visitors as enemy aliens. It appears from his book that Colonel Corso agreed with that assessment, and that it has remained as official U.S. policy ever since. At that time, however, it was an enemy, quote unquote, about which the U.S. could do nothing, because the visitors were so technologically superior. That led to the recommendation that the discovery be treated with the utmost secrecy, to the point that the crash at Roswell didn't happen and that UFOs don't exist. The rationale was that the ordinary public couldn't cope with the news and might easily panic.
Area 51, Dan, I mean, we hear stories from Bob Lazar, we hear stories about alternative space program theories, we're building UFOs and reverse engineering UFO technology since the saucers crashed at Roswell and the plains of St. Augustine, and we have reverse engineered that technology today. That's the theory, and NASA is just a smokescreen program. If we really have true anti-gravity technology today, why aren't we using it in our military? Why isn't it evident in the war in Iraq? Why don't we use it to demonstrate superiority on the planet? And if not, if all of this is just conspiracy theory and we really don't have this technology, again, are we willing to take the risk of losing air superiority on this planet by letting the Russians or the Chinese or some other country, even the Middle East, actually engineer this kind of UFO technology and conquer the world? Are we willing to take that chance?
Well, I think, as far as military applications, maybe they are being used already. Maybe we don't know. Maybe they're being used in a surveillance capacity. As far as weapons that could be associated with such vehicles, one would have to think that if the propulsion system is as sophisticated as it would need to be to have these vehicles just hover, stop, noiselessly take off at right angles, do 3 to 5 to 6 to 20,000 miles an hour, one would think that the military application would then take the form of, rather than rockets and projectiles, that probably a particle beam would be used, some kind of a laser, some kind of a disabling beam to disable equipment, to cause disorientation among men and troops. And of course we have seen no evidence of this. I'm not sure that the US military would want to play that card right now, because after all, the war in Iraq really is a conventional war. We have air superiority there already. There is no Iraqi Air Force. There was no Iraqi Air Force. We, in the United States, we have air superiority basically over the rest of the world. I'm sure there's some pretty hotshot MiG pilots in China and Russia. But I think if you put our Air Force up against any Air Force on this planet, we would prevail without the use of advanced technology of the type we're speaking of. So I think that the U.S., if they have these things, they would probably save them for a more drastic confrontation, perhaps a confrontation with beings that have the potential to be superior over us in terms of the applications of aviation today. So maybe these triangles, the big black deltas, the rectangles, are the next wave of the U.S. military's defense against what some might perceive as an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional threat. Maybe these weapons or these flight systems now are being prepared to confront a race of superior beings that could have designs on the planet that are malevolent. I think it was Lord Hill Norton, or one of the British Air Force Defense Ministry staff who was assigned to study UFOs in the 50s. After he retired, he said that in his estimation there were 23 different species of being visiting the planet in numerous types of vessels. We know from the NASA UFO studies that you've done, and I think that theory, there's nothing wrong with that theory that I can see that doesn't point to what you postulate, and that is that there are benevolent beings that are trying to heal the planet, hence the size of these ships that we're seeing in the STS cameras, and the fact that the ozone has holes in it, the fact that water could be a healing element there. What are these lifesaver-shaped little Dropostone-shaped ships conveying to our planet? Well, we see them coming into the atmosphere, and on the STS tapes and other forms of exposure, they're not releasing personnel, they're not releasing projectiles, and no harm has come to the planet, through their intervention. So one can assume perhaps that maybe there are benevolent beings out there and malevolent beings out there, and maybe the United States government is preparing weapon systems to deal with the malevolent beings. Ronald Reagan said in a speech, he said, what if there were a species from another planet that was threatening us? We would all find a way to work together. And one can only think about the Star Wars system and the fact that there we had satellite-mounted cannon. Well, they'd be good for shooting down rockets. They also might be good for shooting down other invasive vehicles that are coming into our atmosphere. Ronald Reagan himself spoke about a UFO sighting that he had when he was governor of California in the Beach King Air that they used to use. They were coming from Sacramento. His wife was with him, Sacramento to Los Angeles, and a saucer clocked the plane for a good 45 minutes. And Reagan spoke of it to a lot of people. And I think maybe, part of his motivation in getting the Star Wars weapon system up might have been that to prepare ourselves for the day when other beings might come to this planet with designs of, who knows, taking minerals without authorization, taking people. We're probably just going to have to wait to see.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Colonel Corso makes it clear that the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative, appropriately dubbed Star Wars, was primarily designed for use against the alien intruders. His contemporary successor, the anti-missile defense system, is also being designed with that as one of its principal objectives. It is true that a case can be made for attempting to provide a shield against the Russians and Chinese, although everyone knows that the Russians are not going to embark on a policy which would result in their total destruction. It is equally true that they, too, are aware of the visitors and know that the perceived threat from the visitors has been a major consideration in the planning of the anti-missile system.
And the incident in question, as at least from my perspective, almost ignited a nuclear war, and that was 5 unidentified objects were picked up on radar coming in over the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Southern Washington, Oregon area. As these objects approached the coast, Strategic Air Command went on a alert. We were in a defense condition, or what is referred to as a DEFCON, Defense Condition 3, which means that the nuclear forces were ready, but they weren't on a ready stated alert. We elevated that to Defense Condition 4. Defense Condition 5 is launch. When we went on our alert, the Russians were also monitoring our nuclear armed forces as we were theirs. And so they knew that our bombers had gone to fail-safe. They knew that the launch codes had been given. They also knew that the hatches on the ICBM missiles had been removed and that we were getting ready to do a launch. I know that Nixon, President Richard Milhouse Nixon, picked up the phone and called the Kremlin. The White House notified the Kremlin that these objects were not, and I repeat, not a preemptive launch by us, that they too, the Russians, had been tracking these objects as they came in over the Bering Sea.
Probably moved 100 miles in a matter of a second or two.
When we look at alien abduction, I mean, the idea of a human being being taken and having an implant inserted into their body, I often think of how biologists, how we tag whales. You know, we put a chip on a whale and we can track them via satellite, and also how, you know, we go into a frog's pond and we pull out the frog and we spread it out on the table. Remember in biology class we used to do this, and, you know, stick the little needles in his legs and cut him open. I mean, that's how we look at another life form in another world. So is it really a sign of violence and negativity that an extraterrestrial civilization is coming to Earth and doing the same to us, putting computer chip implants on us to track us, know where we are, study our species, do a little bit of biological experimentation? I mean, I know for us it's horrific. I mean, it's absolutely a violent thing for us as humans, but from their perspective, do you really think that they're being violent?
Well, Again, I have to go back to some of them might be here for good purposes.